Okay, class. Good day. Remember where we are now, or are you still with me? We've begun already book 2 on people of God. And by the way, before we start or continue with our lecture, I received already the groupings, except for one group, that one in charge of putting things together as to the meaning of personal ordinariate. I think that's not sufficient because you'll have to deal with a lot more. Imagine your reading will only be 2 pages. So I will write you in Messenger what would still include the report, because I want you to expand, of course, the meaning of ordinariate, especially related to the military ordinariate. Anyway, that will be dealt with in Messenger. So we were with Canon 216, and I particularly ended with that canon that says permission is required in order for an association to use the name Catholic. And that also has allusion to Canon 803, paragraph 3, meaning any institution in the church that uses the word Catholic needs permission from the competent authority. Also important in talking about rights and obligations of the faithful is, of course, a very important canon, and that is Canon 219, the right to immunity from any kind of coercion. Now, you'll have to know what the word immunity means. So, right to immunity from any kind of coercion. So, simply put, it is the freedom to make a personal decision. And this is very important because the right to marry, for example, involves more than the absence of any obligation to marry against one's will. So if it is really not done freely, as we said, like any juridic act must be done freely and knowingly, it's related to Canon 219. So to marry a person not of one's own choice, or not to marry the person of one's own choice, has to be dealt with here accordingly. And for that matter, the right to marry is invalidated if it is entered into out of force, as you know already, or out of great fear from without, as you know already. That's the same if you would have, there's one canon there, 643, paragraph 1, number 4, invalidating admission to the novitiate if one enters the novitiate as a result of the 3 F's: force, fear, or fraud. You know already that I use the word fraud, but our code of canon law uses the word deceit or deception. So this right also involves marriage itself in such a way that if marriage is prevented without coercion or with injustice, for example, by an unjust impediment, the right to marry is also impaired. So the same is true, as we would say, with other states of life, sacred orders, or to a particular institute of consecrated life. Now, a very important canon here is Canon 220. I say very important because, in fact, this will be quoted a lot of times. This is the obligation that does not proceed from baptism, but proceeds from natural law. And I would like to read that. No one may unlawfully harm the good reputation which a person enjoys, or violate the right of every person to protect his or her own privacy. So as I mentioned, this right proceeds from natural law. This right proceeds not from baptism. Remember, we've been talking about the phrase natural law, and we just simplified our own understanding of that, especially when we went into the branches of law, and we said Natural law would deal with the essence of things. So, for example, if you talk of truth, or rather, if you talk of speech, one has to speak in truthfulness. If we talk about marriage, then we will have to speak of marriage as mutual relationship, mutual partnership. We will have also to talk of marriage as the generation of offspring. So here, the canon uses the term unlawfully or illegitimate because it is licit, because it is ethical to bring to light a person's defects or offenses and thus damage his or her reputation in this respect, when the superior good of the individuals, of society, and of the church is at stake. You will have to see that, for example, in the canon making reference to privacy. Canon 240, paragraph 1, the prohibition against securing the opinion of your spiritual director or of your confessor concerning admission or dismissal from the seminary. And that's a very, very sensitive canon because you have the spiritual director, and your spiritual director is a member of the council. And for instance, some other things are, being talked about pertaining to you, certain issues. Will your spiritual director, to whom you have expressed everything, will he have the right to speak in behalf of you or against you? No, and that is very sensitive. So this canon maintains its reference to privacy as it is here. To protect, the person has the right to protect his or her privacy, and that is why it is very sensitive. Also, part of the understanding of that canon is, of course, when you talk about calumny, when you talk about denunciation, talk about insults, talk about slander, and the spreading of rumors. These are all contrary to this right. And that is why it is also said, even or although penal sanctions may involve publicity, it is unlawful to start penal actions when the right of this action exists and it is exercised correctly. We're talking here of, in fact, of the right to good reputation. And we all know for a fact that this right is at risk now, especially when the church, or as the church is being confronted with the issue of a very hot issue, the sexual misconduct of clerics. Suppose you've been following the way Pope Francis would deal with this thing. The recent report, for instance, on the case of Cardinal McCarrick of the Archdiocese of Washington, that is very, very sensitive. But you know that the media often accuse officials of the church of proceeding too slowly when accusations of sexual misconduct, particularly of minors, arise. And you know that that kind of issue is also a crime. And precisely why, civil law is rather, safeguarding this. And the way civil law would have proceeded is also the way they would have asked the church to proceed. And that's precisely why church authorities have a responsibility to move expeditiously, yet must also exercise great caution to protect both the accuser and the cleric involved. So at times a cleric is judged guilty simply due to an accusation. But that is not to say that because there is already an accusation that, we will just proceed the way we would proceed. His reputation is damaged and he may experience difficulties in exercising his ministry. So even if the accusation is later withdrawn or proven false, that is because we will have to proceed in the manner that will involve respect to the rights of the person. The same, for example, when When I was in Zambia, we have, as I mentioned, I must have mentioned that 1 out of 4 Zambian is HIV positive. And of course, you will see that also in the circle of those who apply for the priesthood or those who apply for consecrated life. And for that reason, it is not just easy to tell somebody you have to go for HIV test because you're going to apply for, entrance to consecrated life. It's not that easy, in fact. So, what congregations have been doing through the major religious superiors was to really bring them to the proper forum, and that is counseling before any attempt to request for the necessary document of an HIV test. One has to go through counseling. And you would know easily that if one is seen to have or receives the result of being positive in HIV. So what is that? We will just call it quits for him or quits for her. Of course, it's not that easy. I'm just saying that as an example because the canon makes references to privacy. Okay, the right of the person to protect his or her privacy. Another example is we have this priest who was taken for, a serious investigation over sexual misconduct, and going through the process that is very sensitive. Going through the process on the part of those who will investigate, that's tedious work. You'll have to follow through for every detail. And there is this case, at the end of the day, it was not the priest. So it fell on the wrong priest, the whole accusation. So that would be too heavy to take on the part of the diocese. And yet, we will have to really make sure that since damage has been done over or during the investigation, the church, the diocese, the local church has the responsibility to restore the person back to his kind of what we would say original reputation. That the reputation of the person, which is of course good in the beginning. So the canon, no one may unlawfully harm the good reputation which a person enjoys. No one can violate the right of every person to protect his or her own privacy. So I suppose you'll have to put this in context so that you will really understand what this means. And this is very, very important. There's supposed to be an article which you're going to read on the right to privacy, a question of confidentiality. I don't know if I will be able to get you to that article because getting articles now online is not also that easy, one, and two, it's not also cheap. The next canon is Canon 221, the right to be judged with equity. And there you are again, important canon as it is. If you read that, paragraph 1, Christ faithful may lawfully vindicate and defend the rights they enjoy in the church before the competent ecclesiastical forum in accordance with the law. Paragraph 2, if any members of Christ faithful are summoned but to trial by the competent authority, they have the right to be judged according to the provisions of the law, to be applied with equity. Paragraph 3, Christ faithful have the right that no canonical penalties be inflicted upon them except in accordance with the law. So think of the canon itself speaking of the right to be judged with equity. And equity, as we've already emphasized and have we discussed extensively, is really more than an obligation of incumbent on the judge than a right of the person on trial. So the basis of the right here is justice. So if something happens that in secular declarations and pacts on human rights, what are really principles of judicial and social order, but not rights, are presented as rights. So everything will have to be dealt with in line with rights. And basically, that's to say that the right is being spoken here is related to justice. So the same system is used here to preserve in a form of a right the principle of legality. The principle of legality in penal matters. You would know that famous phrase, nulla pena sine lege. So you will have to translate that in English, because I suppose that's understandable as a Latin axiom. Nulla pena sine lege. Easily you would understand that. Nulla pena, no penalty. And sine, without, and lege, law. Of course, you'll have to do that in good English. You know, the sense of there can be no, or there should not be any judgment or penalty without due process of law. So this principle is, of course, of human law. The other canons here, still part of the rights and obligations of Christ's faithful, is of course the obligation proper to all faithful and the natural obligation incumbent on all, which is the moral obligation of charity towards the poor. Christ's faithful have the obligation to provide for the needs of the church, so that the church has available to it those things which are necessary for divine worship, for apostolic and charitable work, and for worthy support of its ministers. Now, when you come to think of it, it's the responsibility of all those who belong to Christ's faithful to provide for the needs of the church. And here, the needs of the church are defined in three aspects. We have divine worship, we have apostolate or apostolic and charitable work, and we have for the support of the ministers. So paragraph 2 says, they are obliged, or all of Christ's faithful are obliged to promote social justice and mindful of the Lord's precept to help the poor from their own resources. So our obligation, our moral obligation of charity towards the poor. The moment you embrace Christianity, this moral obligation too, you have to embrace, or we all have to embrace. I will leave you with the rest of the canons here. So altogether, you have Canon 208 up to Canon 223, which belongs to the rights and obligations of all Christ faithful. And then now we deal with the rights and obligations of the lay members of Christ faithful. There will be a report, an important report, and I really consider that important because we will have to consider that the lay people are together with us in the same, sense of equality by virtue of our baptismal consecration. So there'll be a report on the lay members of Christ's faithful. And yet a few things that we will have to deal with here. Canon 224, the introductory canon, I will not read that. We're talking of the lay members of Christ's faithful. And Canon 225, the mission of the laity. And that is important, since lay people, like all of Christ's faithful, are deputed to the apostolate by baptism and confirmation. They are bound by the general obligation, and they have the right, whether as individuals or in associations, to strive so that the divine message of salvation may be known and accepted by all people throughout the world. So this obligation is all the more insistent in circumstances in which only through them are people able to hear the message and to know Christ. So I place that there. This is really important in the sense of we have a canon that deals with the mission of the laity. And the mission of the laity derived from one's incorporation into the divine message and the sacrament of initiation. So you have two things there. The sense of the laity to evangelize the world through the gospel, and of course to transform the world through the gospel. So two important things. And yet I place there a line. There is no single manner of carrying out the mission of the church, or the mission of the laity in the church. These two have to be together, to evangelize the world through the gospel and to transform the world through the gospel. So these two have to be taken together. And when we say there is no single manner for carrying out the mission of the laity, there are many avenues to do this. The next slide, 2 to 6, talks of the moral obligation of married couples to contribute to the building up of the people of God. And that is again very important. When you are in the parish, for instance, one of the things that you will have to really emphasize is, of course, the family life apostolate. I take that as very important because our parish is made up of families. Our small Christian communities are made up of families. So that is so important. The obligation of married couples to contribute to the building up of the people of God. So the religious dimension of the family is set in a framework of what we call here tripartite freedom. The freedom of parents to procreate and to educate their children. That's part of coming together as husband and wife in the sacrament of matrimony. And the same right and freedom in relation to the state and civil society. And the third is the freedom of the children and spouses with respect to their religious life. When you talk here of religious life, of course, it's not the phrase as we would use it, religious life, like consecrated life. No, in the manner that they would choose. In the manner of choosing the life that they're going to live as members of the church. So again, we have here the obligation of the laity, which is not juridical, but in fact moral, contributing to the building up of the people of God. And when you say the juridical obligation, then that's where it comes in, the religious dimension of the family within the framework of tripartite freedom. Now, maybe one good discussion here is, of course, when you talk of the moral obligation of the church in terms of governance. Of course, you have here always the issue of why are priests or why are bishops intervening in the political arena. I don't think that is intervening in the political arena, because we have the obligation to look into the moral dimension of political life. In the same manner as you, lay people, if we would have to address them that way, as you lay people, will have the same obligation to look into the moral dimension of our political life. So that's all part of what we're talking about in this canon 226. And now 227, the juridical situation of the lay person with regard to both church and civil society. And I say these are taken in a sense of two fundamental rights of a lay person: the right to religious freedom, the right to religious freedom in civil society, and the right to freedom in secular matters within ecclesiastical society. So that really means the state does not have competence in religious matters, nor does the church in secular ones. So you have to understand that, because the nitty-gritty of the discussion here is very important. The person who has been baptized is a lay person in the canonical sphere. But the same baptized person is a citizen in the civil sphere. So there you are again, the example of, the example of election. The church has to animate people to go and vote. So, and yet that is your right to vote as a member of or as a citizen, as a member of a civil society. So those things have to be taken together. What I quote here is Lumen Gentium 36. I have not shown that slide yet, but I make mention of that last line there, but that's very much inspired by Lumen Gentium. Lumen Gentium, that's the constitution of the church, one of the 16 documents of Vatican II. And number 36 states that the faithful should learn to distinguish carefully between the rights and duties which they have as belonging to the church and those which fall to them as members of human society. So that's the meaning of the last line of the slide there. A person, a baptized person, is a lay person in the canonical sphere and also a citizen in the civil sphere. More to that, the converging, I say there, the converging point of the two is to say that secular matters have a moral dimension and are subject to the law of God. If you'll have to, underline, it is of course subject principally to natural law. So Christians are to be guided by their Christian conscience, since not even in temporal business may any human activity be withdrawn from God's dominion. Again, Lumen Gentium 36. Very important. When you are a politician, you remain a Christian politician. If you are, of course, a Christian. That's what I want to say. If you are a baptized politician, you remain a Christian politician. So you cannot say that now that I'm a politician, I don't have to exercise honesty the way the church understands and the way the church puts emphasis on honesty, because you carry with you your identity as a Christian. That's why I have kind of a question when, for example, your Eucharistic minister all of a sudden decides to run for an political office, and usually the thing is how do you say that? Maglaylo muna ako. Hindi muna ako mag-Eucharistic minister, Pads, dahil I will run for political office. Why? Bakit ka maglaylo? And that's because we also make of our Eucharistic minister na para bagang if he runs for office or if she runs for office, and she continues to be visible at the altar, it's like, oh, this is a campaign. No, I don't think that should be taken as a campaign. So sometimes, these things, sensitive they may be, they should not really, or they should really be put in good or proper context. So I mean, just a kind of a reflection on that, because this is also important when you talk of what I said there, and what Lumen Gentium also emphasized, the converging point of the two secular matters, having a moral dimension, and secular matters subject to the law of God. So this is the reason why, again, as I mentioned, the hierarchical structure of the church intervenes in secular matters, though its teaching on faith and moral rules that govern human conduct, we would say, belonging to the arena of Christian language. Because what we say here, intervention is not a search for conclusive solutions to secular problems, but intervention is, of course, looking into the moral dimension or the spiritual influence of that aspect of our political life. So you have Canons 2 to 8 there. I will let you read that, especially the reporters on the role of lay people, Canon 2 to 9, and then a little bit of what is there on Canon 230. I put here a special emphasis of Canon 230 because at one time, one parish priest told me, magbigay ka nga ng input about canon law in our parish. I was like saying, my God, who likes to listen about canon law in a parish? But he said, no, that is important. So I put certain things together, and only to realize that Canon 230 was kind of discussed a little bit in that seminar for a reason that it was not well understood. The context was like all the Eucharistic ministers had a seminar in the diocese, and no one was left in the parish, and yet all together. The same thing happens on a Sunday. The church is packed, and should the parish priest be the only one to distribute communion? Of course, the parish priest knows what he is supposed to do, or what he was supposed to do. So he took from among the lay people, or from among those who attended Mass, people whom he knew, to come up and assist him in giving communion. And the other side of the story is, this got to the ears of the Eucharistic ministers, and they engaged the parish priest in a kind of a, situation where say, why did you do that, Father? That's against the rules of the diocese pertaining to distribution of Holy Communion. It's either you or us or both of us together. But no, Canon 230 says here, laymen. So you have that point there. Laymen whose age and talents meet the requirements prescribed by decree of the Episcopal Conference can be given the stable ministry of lector and of acolyte through the prescribed liturgical rite. So you have laymen, and then you have stable. So that's the point there. Men only, males only, the stable ministry of lector and acolyte. Now, that is very important, because in the whole history of ordination, before somebody is ordained to the priesthood, one has to receive the minor orders. Of course, there are no more minor orders now. Lector was a minor order. Acolyte was a minor order. Tonsure is a minor order. Porter was a minor order. So Vatican II has gotten rid of minor orders. But what stayed on were lectorate, or are lectorate and acolytate, but no more as minor orders. They're considered as ministries. And now you will see why. Because these two are shared by lay people. Now, I want to emphasize that lectorate and acolytate are ministries. Before, they were orders, minor orders. Now, why were they retained? Because these are ministries shared by both the ordained and the lay people. So that's the first paragraph there. Males only. And then you have paragraph 2, which says lay people. When you say lay people, so people here becomes inclusive. You have the male and female. So that's why I put there male and female without distinction. As the canon says, lay people can receive a temporary assignment to the role of lector in liturgical actions. And precisely why you have lectors. You have lectors and commentators from among the lay people. And you have lectors and commentators who are male and female. So all lay people can exercise the roles of commentator, cantor, or other such in accordance with the law. So you take note of that. You have a lector. It's very funny because we have this installation to the lectorate, and and then people, seminarians, they have that as a requirement before ordination to the diaconate, and then you invite people because there is an installation as if this is really a big thing. Of course, you can make a big thing out of it. And then somebody was saying, "Anong difference noon, Padre, sa pagka-lectorate namin?" I'm almost tempted to say there's no difference, because exactly there's no difference. The only thing is, of course, to those entering into the ministerial priesthood, that goes with paragraph 1. It is a prescribed requirement, and it is a stable ministry for those who are entering into the ministerial priesthood. For the lay people, of course, we call it a temporary assignment. They can receive the role of lector. And then paragraph 3 there, where the needs of the church require and ministers are not available, again, lay people, even though they are not lectors or acolytes, can supply certain of their functions, that is, exercise the ministry of the word, preside over liturgical prayers, confer baptism, and distribute Holy Communion in accordance with the provisions of the law. So that's where the emphasis is. Male and female without distinction, both for necessity, and that's the point there of the canon, for necessity and due to the lack of clerics. So both for necessity and due to the lack of clerics, lay people can supply certain functions of exercising, and you have the whole ministries there. Ministry of the word, presiding over liturgical prayers, conferring baptism, and distributing Holy Communion in accordance with the law. If you go to the canons pertaining to the sacraments, that's book 4, you will see that there is what you call the ordinary minister of baptism, and there's what you call the extraordinary minister of baptism, and so on. So that's to give emphasis to that particular canon, Canon 230. And then you have Canon 231. Again, I leave that to you to read, lay people who are pledged to the special service of the church, and so on. Now, I don't discuss Title 3 as sacred ministers or clerics, because I will discuss that towards the end of this particular discussion on Book 2. So I will jump immediately to associations of Christ's faithful. That is Title 5. Now, what is in Title 4? Because that's Title 3 pertaining to the clerics. Title 4 pertains to personal prelatures. There are 4 canons there. You just have to read that, and you get excited because there's only one personal prelature in the whole of the church, and that's the prelature of the Opus Dei. And a story has been told by our professor there while I was studying, that on the eve of the promulgation of the Code of Canon Law of 1983, very much influenced by Opus Dei, on the eve, these 4 canons were inserted there. But that is really to put them in to give them place in the canon. It's almost like giving them a position in the church, a special position in the church. But exactly the way they are there, Title 4, personal prelatures, that's really to say they have a special place in the church. And that's for your reading. We will come back to a little commentary on that when we go to what is equivalent to a diocese. So that's a personal prelature. What you define as prelature is equivalent to a diocese, but this one is a personal prelature, personal reference to the Holy Father. And there's only one, that's what I'm saying, the Opus Dei. So we go to Title 5, which is Associations of Christ Faithful. Associations of Christ Faithful. Now, what do we have there? What we have there are associations, may be three kinds. So when you say Christ Faithful, again, keep in mind that we're talking of all the baptized. So precisely why when you talk of associations, there are three kinds, common to all the faithful. So you have an association that embraces priests and lay people together. And you have an association which is clerical, and you have an association reserved for lay people only. Now you will have to imagine a lot of things here because we have many examples. Now you talk, for example, of what an association common to all the faithful, where you have the priests and the lay people together, or women and men, both of the ministerial priesthood and the common priesthood together. So you have like focolare. Focolare is an association. Focolare is an association where you have priests and lay people together. And you talk of a clerical association. It might be good to already mention this in the beginning. Any group founded for the clerical ministry will be an association, will begin as an association. There are people who always keep talking about pious union, like I belong to the Missionaries of Jesus, and then they ask me, are you a pious union? Now that is a terminology that belongs to the old code, to the code of 1917. What would belong to the new code now is, of course, a public association. So like sisters, a new foundation of religious sisters, they will also enter in what you would call an association, private association, moving on to a public association before they are recognized as an institute of diocesan right. Now, very particular is, of course, this clerical association. So, if you start a group, if you found a group that is that serves the clerical state, so it will begin as a public clerical association. So like Alagad ni Maria is a public clerical association. What else? Like this MMMP. What is this congregation again of the late Father Suarez, yung maraming pera? You know that, MMP. Anyway, that should supposed to enter into that classification of a public clerical association. And it is really made up only of, supposed to be, or of clerics, later on of clerics. And then you have lay people, associations composed mainly of lay people. So you have this CWL, Catholic Women's Legs, or Catholic Women's League, Knights of Columbus, and what have you. So you have you can easily identify these associations of three kinds. They have their own particular canons. Now, just to make mention of that, if you go to the second classification there of a clerical association, of course there are conditions. Talk of they should be directed by clerics. Talk of its proposed aim. Its proposed aim should be the exercise of sacred orders. 3, it must be erected by a competent authority as a clerical association, and consequently will possess the status of public association. So, that's very particular to a clerical association. I have that in the slide, the last, the second point there of the same slide. And then part of a discussion of associations, of course, you have associations in relation to the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Now, I will discuss this like generically. So, an association is public if it is erected by a competent authority. So, Canon 301, paragraph 3. If it is established by a competent ecclesiastical authority, that association is called public association. Now, but the nice thing in the church is, of course, it recognizes that an association can be private if it is not founded by, or if it is not erected by, if it is not started by a competent authority. So that's why you have a private association. But this private association needs to be what you call recommended, needs to be praised. In other words, needs to be recognized by a competent authority. So because you have to be an association in the church. So private association founded by a private individual, private couple, or whatever, it is going to be recognized in the church. It will have also to be scrutinized by a competent authority. That's what you call, there's a Latin phrase, decretum laudis. So they will have to receive the decree of praise to be recognized. So, and of course, the other classification of associations is they may be universal, they may be national, or they may be diocesan. So according to their scope and extension, and you have that in the canons here. So I mentioned common norms related to associations of Christ faithful. And you will have to read that yourself, all other canons pertaining to all these associations. What is that? In the Vatican, there is, of course, an office that really puts things together. Like you have the Pontifical Council of the Laity, or the Secretariat of State of the Vatican that looks into all these associations that have reached the identity of it being for the universal church or for with an international scope. So that's all about associations. If you have still other points, you go through them. The last point there is to be emphasized: no private association is recognized in the church if its statutes have not been received, or have not received what you call recognitio. Of course, what is essential to an association, or what you call their an essential element of an association is the statutes, is the constitution. So constitutions have to be reviewed. You cannot exist as an association if you don't have what you call statutes or constitutions. So Rome is becoming, in fact, kind of stricter on this. It should be stipulated that before you are recognized, before you are approved, your constitutions have to go through a scrutiny by the proper authorities of the church, or the competent authorities of the church. I move to the next slides, which actually pertain to the subject on part 2, the hierarchical structure of the church. I just want to begin that point. So I leave you with part 1. That's just like going through it as as quickly, run through, and then we go to part 2. The hierarchical constitution of the church. Might be good to quote here what who's this canon lawyer of the Canon Law Society of the Americas, Corridon. So you must have seen the book of Father Corridon, because he is the, rather I should say, well quoted or the most famous from among the members of the Canon Law Society of the Americas. So he starts his subject on the hierarchy with this phrase: make sure that everything is done properly and in good order, since God is a God not of confusion but of peace. That's quoting St. Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 14, verse 40, and of course going also to verse 33. Make sure that everything is done properly and in good order, since God is a God not of confusion but of peace. Now, if you talk of hierarchy, you have to situate that in the sense of order. If you talk of somebody who has to, who has to be an authority above us or over and above the subjects of the church, is because we need order. And that's the point. And the other side of the mind of Father Corridon is, in no way should these people in authority abuse this function. They are there to bring order in the any ecclesial organization, and in no way should they bring disorder or chaos, or in no way should they abuse the position of authority or power therein. God is God of peace. A few more slides pertaining to what do we mean by hierarchy here. So imagine hierarchy, of course, as a ladder. So you're going up the ladder. Maybe good example here is what I keep saying in consecrated life. In consecrated life, there's no ladder to climb. Today you are the superior, tomorrow you are back to the ranks. So we don't belong to this hierarchical structure. So put things together. Hierarchy is a system of persons marked by grades or classes. So that's really just to define, hierarchy is a system of persons who are marked by grades or by class, and you have that. Of course, when you talk of the caste system, CASTE in India, that's not a good way of looking at a system of persons, because it's a system of persons where you have really people who are subjected to, by a caste system is really putting people in that kind of order where you only stay in that lower rank. But when you talk of a system of persons, it's a system that should serve persons in good order. Or you also go to the Marxist system. That's I think where people are not so at home or don't get easily with the philosophy of Marx, because it's identified with class system. Okay, the working class. And when you talk of the phrase working class, people are so afraid of that because the rise of the working class. So again, talk of the hierarchy, talk of the system of persons. Now, another point when you speak of hierarchy, it's not a biblical expression. It's a human invention. So it might be good to Google here, because you will have to see a lot of things. Now, there is a person by the name of Dionysius, whom you consider, or whom Mr. Google would consider a pseudo Areopagite, or if you want to read it Areopagite, you can also do that. But pseudo Areopagite. So if there's a pseudo Areopagite, there must be a real one. So Dionysius, the pseudo Areopagite, it's because there is Dionysius, the real Areopagite. And you would recall that because he was one of those who became a believer after hearing the preaching of the Apostle Paul. And that's why you have the famous place Areopagus. It's like, when you go to Greece, don't miss that. That's a kind of a promontory place near the Acropolis in Athens. So, you will have the chance to go there. It's good. Anyway, so you have the real Areopagus, real Dionysius, and then you have this Dionysius, the pseudo-Areopagite. One of the treatises of pseudo-Dionysius is entitled The Celestial Hierarchy. So celestial, the heavenly. So in heaven there is a hierarchy. That's what he says there. So he describes the descending order of the angels. The descending order of the angels, meaning this is the group closer to or more distant from God. So this is the source of the traditional, what you call the 9 choirs of angels. If you're familiar with, or if not familiar, if you've been following very well the right in the new translation of the Roman Missal, something I'm not so at home with. Lots of the prefaces in the Mass has gone into this, this articulation of the choirs of angels, because you have the first sphere made up of the heavenly guardians of God, the heavenly messengers and soldiers. So that's why you have this phrase there, the principalities with the archangels and angels. So you have that. And this belongs to what the Dionysius there, the pseudo-Areopagite, calls the celestial hierarchy. Of course, to make the whole literature as short as possible, if there is a celestial hierarchy, says Dionysius, there must be an ecclesiastical hierarchy. So that's the work of a pseudo-Dionysius, creating an order and function of hierarchy. So that's why you have the other slide where I put a little word on the hierarchy as what? The hierarchy as a term that does not imply domination. So Lumen Gentium chapter 18, you have the servant of their brothers and sisters. The servant of their brothers and sisters who is there to maintain unity and the identity of the social body, which is the church. And of course, the famous word there is what you say what you see and what you say from scriptures. I have come to serve and not to be served. And this phrase must be so important to the Christian community, to the first believers, because the 3 synoptic gospels have the phrase, I come to serve and not to be served. So I put that there just to make sure that you don't forget Mark, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Matthew. So you have Matthew chapter 20, you have Mark chapter, You have Mark chapter 10, and then you have Luke chapter 22, making emphasis of what it really means to be in the hierarchy, and meaning to be a servant of one's brothers and sisters. Now, Vatican II, of course, teaching on church authority, attempted to correct some of the distortions caused by historical events, what it calls also historical turnings. Now, I will not go through that, but I just have to cite a few things. Now, this is important in understanding, hierarchy. and the way hierarchy has moved on historically, because this will shed light on what we would say history repeats itself because nobody listens. I don't think history will repeat itself if people listen, if the church listens. So there is what you call here some distortions in the way you would understand hierarchy at the service of people. So some historical events and turnings, when you, for instance, go to Pax Romana, the famous Pax Romana in history, or that famous historical event in the church when Christianity became the official religion of the empire. So now you have what you call, there is no separation of church and state. But that was very dangerous, historical turning, because the church became also powerful, and it embraced imperial power. So, you would look at it in that sense, then you fail to address the fact that the church is to be at the service of its or her brothers and sisters. And when you are, in power, especially when you hold political power, that can be very dangerous. Think, for instance, of that famous historical event, as I mentioned there, in Numbers, when the church had supremacy, and then considered spiritual supremacy as over and above civil or temporary authority. So the way things are interpreted is also the way we would behave as constitutive of what is to be in the hierarchy. So things like this, you'll have to understand that. You review that. You have that in your history. One of the things that you will also realize is in canon law, when you talk of the hierarchical constitution of the church, no matter how this is put together with the ecclesiological paradigm of church as people of God, the ecclesiological paradigm of Vatican II, you'll have to understand that very well. A priest is very powerful in the church. And to put emphasis is the parish priest is a very powerful person in the church. And so is the bishop. There's always this question in civil society, how come in the church you have what you call the sole corporate, sole, S-O-L-E. There is a sole corporation in the church. Yeah, that's the bishop. The bishop is a sole corporate. He is the administrator, he is the legislator, and he is also the judge. So all branches of governance taken by one person. Again, that's where we are. That's part of our, what we call the hierarchical constitution of the church. And you'll have to kind of put those things together when you especially bring these elements of Book 2, Part 2, the hierarchical constitution of the church. Other things that I have also underlined there, but I will not discuss because you've taken that, we've taken that together in Book 1, are what we call the elementary concepts. Elementary concepts of the hierarchy. So, those things I've already discussed, these two slides, what is really a biblical vision of hierarchy and restoring that biblical vision of a service, and then some elementary concepts pertaining to the hierarchy. Now, we underline the fact, as I mentioned already, that the sacrament of holy orders determine which persons among the faithful are called to exercise and to render capable of public function in the church. And again, that is important. Now, that's why in the report, I of course highlight the lay people. Sad to say that in the Code of Canon Law, there is this the power of governance. You've seen that already in Book 1, underlying the fact that this is reserved to those in sacred orders. And then you have the line there, but the lay people, what is there? Participate? No. The Code of Canon Law has used a lesser degree terminology. The lay people cooperate. But in fact, in the whole discussion of the code before, it was supposed to be participate. So there you are again. But that is not to say that lay people don't have, a share in the hierarchical functions as we will see later in the church. What else? So you have those elementary concepts. I will not discuss that. I leave that with you. I go immediately to the institutions. So you have what you call the universal church and the institutions that serve the universal church. Then you have the local church and the institutions that serve the local church. What we would call also like bodies or organs of collaboration. And then you have the parish, which is the smallest unit, and then the bodies, the organisms that serve the parish. So we begin with the College of Bishops. How will I begin with the College of Bishops? Maybe it's good to take note that it may not be the way your ecclesiology would look. The way canon law looks at the College of Bishops may not be the way your ecclesiology class or your theology of the church would define the College of Bishops. But the way it is here, the College of Bishops is a successor body to the College of the Apostles. It is subject of supreme and full power in the universal church. It holds complete and preeminent authority, juridic and moral authority, as well as pastoral solicitude. It's the best expression of the communion of churches which constitutes the universal church. Now, College of Bishops. There are two conditions to belong to the Episcopal College of Bishops. And what are these conditions? The episcopal ordination, of course, obviously. What people would call also episcopal consecration, and then hierarchical communion. So I say there are two conditions required to belong to the College of Bishops. A bishop becomes a member of the Episcopal College through episcopal ordination. A bishop belongs or becomes a member of the Episcopal College through hierarchical communion. Now, hierarchical communion is very important. Communion with what? With the head of the college. Communion with who? With the Pope, the Roman Pontiff, who is the head of the college. And, of course, communion with the other members of the college. Now, there has been a discussion with, for instance, the validity of the bishop of the People's Republic of China, because, of course, Pope Francis is working this out where China recognizes, the government of China recognizes the state of the Vatican. Not the state of the Vatican, but the Vatican state. Now, for as long as China does not recognize the authority of the Vatican, in no way can the bishop ordained in the patriotic church be a valid bishop or a bishop that belongs to the College of Bishops, because part of it is what you call hierarchical communion, communion with the head of the college in communion with other members of the college, but an ordained bishop of the patriotic, Church of China cannot be, a bishop in communion with the College of Bishops. So, one of those questions, but talking of validity of whom you would call a bishop in the Roman Catholic Church is by two conditions as required. He has to be episcopally ordained or consecrated, and of course he has to be in hierarchical communion with the head of the college and with other members of the college. So that's giving emphasis on the College of Bishops. Now, what you call also a College of Bishops is the other point there is this is a decision-making body of the church. Okay, it has the supreme power over the universal church, and of course exercised in an ecumenical council. So when you talk of the College of Bishops functioning as a body, that's when they come together as an ecumenical council. So the same collegial power may be exercised by the bishops dispersed throughout the world, but also the same collegial power is exercised, especially when they come in what you call an ecumenical council. Vatican Council too, that's ecumenical council. And that's a decision-making body. That's a body with a deliberative vote. That's a body that functions with a vote of consent. And when you talk of vote of consent, you have to understand that side by side with what you call the consultative vote. So that's to speak of the College of Bishops is to speak of the college that has decision-making in the universal church. What else? The other slide here is Canon 336, but maybe before that, some things of the head of the College of Bishops, and that's the Roman Pontiff. More than anything else, what I just want to emphasize here are, of course, certain things you will have to observe when the Roman Pontiff gets elected. One, the Roman Pontiff is elected in a conclave, cum chiave, as they say, conclave. That means they are, that the emphasis there is the key, the chiave, like what they say in Espanol or in Cebuano, chiave, the susi, the key. Because meaning conclave is they are locked in. And there was a history in the church where they were really, because they could not elect a pope, I don't know, was it like, quite a number of 3 years probably? And so that's the reason why in a conclave they have to be locked in so that they can elect pope without the influence of the what you would call the outside world. So that's one. Of course, now we will still repeat this. What I'm talking now when we talk of the College of Cardinals. Of course, we have the institution of the College of Cardinals, from whom is elected the Pope. But the College of Cardinals is supposed to be made of, composed of people who may not be bishops. But the canon here, of course, says when you are appointed a cardinal, you have to be ordained. But seemingly there is an option not to be ordained bishop, so you can have a priest who remains as a priest. Now, most of the priests made cardinals by the Pope, the recent Pope and his predecessors, they are already priests who are no longer eligible to go to the conclave, because you must be you must not be beyond 80 to be able to enter the electoral body, which is the conclave. So many of those priests talk about Yves Congar, um, this author of the Models of the Church, Avridales. They were made cardinals by the Pope when they were already, beyond 80, maybe 86, 87, 88, 89, and some biblical scholars. So practically that is to honor them for the distinguished, to this, this kind of honor them, give them the distinction for their work in the church. But otherwise, in the history of the church, there was a deacon who was elected pope, and Pope Adrian the Fourth. He was a deacon elected pope, and that I would like to bring you to the next point, where that's the reason why when you're elected pope, you have to make sure that you're a bishop already. If you are not yet a bishop, they will ordain you bishop there and then. So if you're like a priest and you're elected pope, before you're announced to the world, or before they say Abemus Papam, they have to make sure that this priest elected there in the conclave is ordained. So they will ordain him bishop there and then. And that brings me to the next point, where of course you have to be ordained bishop, because the Pope is first and foremost the bishop of the Diocese of Rome. That's also the reason why before the Pope says Mass elsewhere, even right there in Piazza San Pietro, or the Basilica of St. Peter, his first Mass as Pope, his first Thanksgiving Mass as Pope, does not happen in the Basilica of St. Peter. It happens in the Basilica of St. John Lateran, which is the seat of the Diocese of Rome. So, just to put things logically when you speak of the Roman Pontiff. Maybe other point that would be more interesting is Canon 332, the way we also have to see the Roman Pontiff, especially that we have already, after more than 300 years, we have gotten a Pope who has resigned, Pope Benedict XVI. So paragraph 2, Canon 332, paragraph 2 says, should it happen that the Roman Pontiff resigns from his office, it is required for validity, and you always talk of validity in canon law, so for validity that the resignation be freely made, that we know. Any resignation will have to be made freely and properly manifested, but it is not necessary that it be accepted by anyone. So because we talk of the laws of the ecclesiastical office, that last part of Book 1, and the laws of ecclesiastical office comes with the resignation, but the resignation to be valid must be accepted by a higher authority if the one who resigns belongs to the lower authority. So here, it's also logical to say that if the Pope resigns, it is not necessary that it be accepted. His resignation is valid there and then, ipso facto, because who's going to accept his resignation anyway? He being the highest authority in the church. So that's kind of a shift from the College of Bishops to the head of the College of Bishops. So that's I think all that I want to say about College of Bishops. But you have to read the entire, of course, presentation here of Article 2 with the canons that speak of the College of Bishops. That's I have commented on this canon. So the next one, the next institution of the church, and then I will finish with that, just for today. the Synod of Bishops. So, Synod of Bishops. Synod of Bishops, that's very famous because um, there have been many synods of bishops, and most of the synods of bishops that we have had in the church most recently have been dealing with a lot of themes that have affected the church at large. For example, we had a synod on family, we had a synod on justice, 1971. Of course, the more prominent synods under Pope John Paul II were regional in nature, the Synod for Asia, for Americas, for Africa, for Lebanon. So a lot of these that would speak of the issues pertaining to the church in those regions or in those areas. So just to set the etymology, when you talk of synod, you have the Greek synodos, which actually means coming together. So that's the sense there of the synod is a coming together of bishops who would consist of those that we would call, or as the canon would say, advisors to the Pope. So its primary function is really advisory, because the Synod of Bishops, it's there to advise the Pope on, matters of faith or matters of morals and church discipline, and of course consider the activities of the church in the world. There are three kinds of synodal assemblies. The ordinary general, which deals with subjects of special interest in the church. You have also extraordinary, matters which need speedily resolution. That Pope Francis, for instance, called for an extraordinary synod on the family. And of course, special. So you have the ordinary, extraordinary, and special. Special more deals with things related to regional in nature. So again, there are quite a number of canons there that belongs to the Synod of Bishops. You have canons 342 up to canon 348. So you just have to read that. There is a permanent secretariat of the Synod of Bishops in Rome, and that's an important an office there, more than other offices, because that's when you have these assemblies of members of the hierarchy. That's really an office that calls for the coming together of the members of the hierarchy. And so you have the College of Bishops, that's a deliberative institution in the Universal Church, and you have the Synod of Bishops, which is actually consultative and advisory institution of the Universal Church. So that's all for now. We will deal with the other institutions in the Universal Church. I think we'll go fast with that next meeting. You have the slides, so you read them already ahead of time, and then supply them with the canons as it is in your canon law book. And then just to remind you that, did we not say December 1, we shall do the 4-hour, the full 4-hour time slot for this course, because then we will hear the different groups. Did I not say, or did I not preempt the discussion by saying that this will serve as your final exam, or if it of course passes the standard? So what is required of the group is, of course, you present an outline to the members of the class, and of course to me, and then you have a good PowerPoint presentation, and then you have this full literature of your report, which is only to be submitted to me. Everything will be soft copies. So that means send that to me through email. So you are 3 members in the group, and I suppose that that should be sufficient as a working group for each of the reports. If you have other questions, of course, then you address that through your group chat, and then I will read that there. Thank you. That's all for today. So see you next meeting.